Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. My name is Marco Sarancibia. I'm Product Manager for Data Science and Big Data. And today you're joining the Oracle Machine Learning Office Hours. And we have the pleasure of being joined by Mark Hornick, Senior Director of Product Management for Data Science and Machine Learning. And we're going to be talking about the Oracle Machine Learning Notebooks. Basically, the topics for my brief introduction is going to be the upcoming session, and then we're going to go to Mark and the Machine Learning Notebook session. And then we're going to finish with Q&A. So the next session in April 8th, it is actually going to be a continuation of this session. We found that the Machine Learning Notebooks, especially when we go into details and talking about all the components that it has, it is definitely a session that is going to be split into 2 days. So look forward to this new session that we're going to come up with as well in April. But then, as always, we're going to go into Q&A at the end of today's session as well for any details. For anything related to machine learning and Oracle Machine Learning, please take a look at our website at oracle.com/machine-learning. Also, make sure you check out the free account, right, with oracle.com/cloud/free. You have the always free autonomous account that you can actually use with the Oracle Machine Learning components. So for today's session, then, Mark Hornick is with us, and he's going to share and take a deeper dive into the Oracle Machine Learning notebooks and understand all of the things that we do with the Zeppelin-based interface. And if time allows, we're going to go to some of the more details into the API functionality of the Oracle Machine Learning for SQL. We'll see how the time goes. Mark, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Marcos. So today we're going to speak about Oracle Machine Learning Notebooks, looking at some of the less expected features that people may be wanting to use. And again, my name is Mark Hornick with the Oracle Machine Learning Product Management. Our usual safe harbor statement: the following is intended to outline our general product direction, intended for information purposes only. So since we're talking about machine learning notebooks, just to get everybody on the same page if you're not familiar with them, our notebooks are a collaborative user interface that's based on Apache Zeppelin. And it's intended to support a wide range of users: data scientists, data analysts, application developers, and DBAs. We're going to build on this theme throughout the session today. It's really taking Autonomous Database and making it not just a data platform, but a data science platform as well, where users can easily share notebooks and templates, have permissions, versioning, and execution scheduling in the form of jobs. And this is all included with Autonomous Database. So Autonomous Database deals with the provisioning, the managing, the backing up of your environment and your analytics engine, and you're leveraging these in-database SQL algorithms and analytic functions to do your work, such as explore and prepare data, build and evaluate models, and score data, as well as to deploy solutions. Now, today, Oracle Machine Learning Notebooks focuses on SQL, but we will soon be augmenting that with Python and later R. So as far as the topics that we're going to cover, we've got quite a list, and that's why Marcus mentioned we're likely to split this into 2 sessions and go into more details in April. But the idea is to give you a quick orientation demo, so you have a feel for what the notebook environment is like. Then talk about objects and relationships. What are the different types of entities that we deal with in the OML Notebooks environment, and how do they relate to one another? We'll then talk about projects and workspaces, some notebook basics, collaboration, connection groups, and interpreter bindings. Those are really important for how we interact with the Autonomous Database. Scheduling jobs for notebook execution. And then some interesting areas just on notebooks themselves, like output formats and forms that you can use in notebooks for data entry in a more a less code-oriented way. And then some lesser-known OML4SQL features, and finishing up with the OML roadmap on ADB. So we'll see how far we get with this. So let's do a quick orientation demo. And what we're going to do is log in. We'll explore the various menus that are there and the elements. I'm only going to cover these very superficially at first, and then we'll be diving into each of these in more detail. So to do this, I have two browsers, two different browsers, because I want to log in as two different users. And the first one here I have as a regular developer user. So that's, I'm going to log in as Mark, and we'll see what we get there. And I'm also going to log in as the administrator, so you can contrast the two of these. On the left-hand side, we see that the developer view has how do I get started? How do I create notebooks? And these are basically web pages that you can go to for additional detail on each of these topics. In addition, with the hamburger menu, we have the home area. We have notebooks that you can view what are the notebooks that are available to the user, and we'll be going through these with different workspaces and accounts. There are different types of templates. There are shared templates. There are example templates, and we'll be talking about these in more detail as well. In the case of jobs, we can schedule notebooks to run automatically, and we're going to take a look at some of those. Connection groups, how are we able to connect from a notebook to a autonomous database instance? And then also, what are the live notebook sessions that are available? We can see those as well. So that gets us started there. And on the admin side, you see that they have a reduced view, right? They're not going to have the run SQL statements, run SQL scripts, because administrators don't run notebooks. They can view them and they can manipulate other aspects of the environment, but that's not something that they do. They also don't have the ability to create new notebooks, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So objects and relationships. In the autonomous database, and we have OML users that are created. And so each OML user is going to get his own, her own schema in that autonomous database. So what's inside each of these? Well, an OML user can have one or more workspaces, and a workspace is really the unit of sharing, and we're going to talk more about that later. Within a workspace, we can organize our notebooks by projects, and we can create multiple projects in our workspace as well as the notebooks that are there. And when we talk about ScratchPad, you'll see that those are also associated with projects as we work with those. Now, a data science team is one that, we talk about collaboration with the OML Notebooks environment. And so we might have a project lead who is overseeing an overall team of data scientists, data analysts, DBA, application developer, and he also needs to provide reports to the executive. They should be perhaps read-only, and they're using the same environment. The DBA is going to be providing some data management support to the other team members, and we'll say more about exactly what he'll be doing a bit later. And then the data scientists and data analysts, well, they're going to be developing their scripts, whether they're SQL or later Python and R, and they're going to make those available to the application developer. Now, when we have all of these users, the administrator can go in and actually create new accounts for these users. So each one of those is going to get that. We have the project lead, and we've assigned some names just for convenience here. We've got Mark as the project lead, Pete as the application developer, Cindy, the data analyst, and our data scientist, Sergio, our executive, and Tim, our DBA. And we also have an additional schema that one might like to create to store all of the what we call the gold data, right? The data that you want to have available to everyone, but you don't necessarily want users to be able to modify that source data, but you do want them to have access to it and to be able to work with that in their own environment. So this is sort of setting the stage for what we can handle with that. Now, you might also be asking the question, if I operate on multiple PDBs, do I have separate user accounts for each one of those? And the answer is yes. So if I have another, say, DB2, it's a different PDB, then I would have a different set of schemas in that with a different login for that. Now, if we look at how this would work from a user administration standpoint, the system administrator is able to create, edit, and delete the OML user accounts, and I'll show you the interface for that in a moment. We have read-only access to notebooks, can't run or create notebooks, and if we're going to remove a certain user from a given environment, we can reassign their workspace when deleting those users. Now, developers, on the other hand, can create projects and workspaces. They can do all of the work, create, edit, delete, version, and run notebooks, especially in their own workspaces. And they can work with the ScratchPads and schedule jobs for notebook execution. So let's go back to our views here. And we're in the admin role and the admin account. And I say, well, I want to do some administration. And so let's manage OML users. And so in this case, I'm going to log into a separate tab. And we'll see that these are the users that I've created. So we have the administrator as a separate user. And then all of the other users, I've indicated their role in their name field, but they have them as developers. And if I wanted to create a new user, I could specify their name, give them an email address. They'd have some default password that they can override from there. And then that user would show up in this list for this particular PDB. So in this scenario, what we're going to have is the Mark user is going to have a workspace. Now, whenever a user logs in, they have an initial workspace set up for them, which is associated with, say, their name, an initial project, and they can start populating that with notebooks and ScratchPads. But we can also create additional workspaces. And in this case, we've created the DevTest workspace, which is going to have two projects, customer segmentation and demand forecasting, and we'll have some notebooks in that. We're going to use that really as a demo vehicle just to illustrate some of the behavior of notebooks in general. So the workspace is the unit that is shared with other team members, either as a manager, developer, or viewer. We're going to focus on the developer or viewer side as we go forward. So if we look again at our team, our data science team, and the workspace permissions, our executive really only needs to be a viewer. You know, he can go in and view the notebook reports that are produced by the project lead and view any of the DevTest workspace notebooks that are shared there. The admin, we've already discussed what that person can do, and that's really the project lead who has set this up. And the project lead wants to provide notebook reports to the executive as well as review the team's work and collaborate with the various teams on notebook sessions. The data scientist is going to do machine learning activities and deliver scripts perhaps to the application developer or the data analyst. The data analyst is going to work with notebooks as well, perhaps for data preparation and visualization, and maybe even tie in with Oracle Analytics Cloud for that. And they may also use some of the scripts produced by the data scientist. The DBA, on the other hand, is going to load and prepare data for the team, make sure that everyone has access to that, and perhaps collaborate with other users to assist with queries and data analysis. And then finally, the application developer is going to use the scripts that are provided in applications and dashboards, supporting whatever this data science team is tasked with doing. And they really only need the read-only view of the other scripts because they're not necessarily modifying them. They're simply taking them and using them in a deployed scenario. Now, if we look at the user roles from the Mark DevTest workspace permissions, we see how we've assigned those. So let's take a look at how we actually do that. So we come here and here. So we're now in the Mark area, and we can say, I want to look at workspace permissions. And by looking at workspace permissions, we see the same view in the screen capture, where we've got the developer as Cindy, Ann, and Tim, and the viewers as Pete and Sergio, the application developer and the executive. Now, we can override certain things. Suppose if we wanted to say, no, we really want Ann to be a manager, well, we can just go in and if we click add to that, that'll change that. But if we don't want to, we can simply go back and keep that the same and it will override those. And for any other new user, we may want to add to this particular workspace. So a little bit more on projects and workspaces. So the initial workspace and the default project are created by the OML service automatically when you first log into OML. And we're going to use the data analyst account to create a new workspace within the Create Project dialog and share that workspace. And then we'll show about managing workspaces and granting some permissions. So we'll go back to our interface here. We have Mark, it's still logged in on the left, but we're going to go back and sign out of this and log in as Cindy. So we can change accounts very easily to illustrate what's happening here. But we're in the shared project at the moment, but I want to actually create a new project with this. So how am I going to deal with that? We can select a project that we're in. We can manage our workspaces. And with this, we can decide what the permissions are that we wish to have for this workspace. So we have Mark as a viewer, and we have Pete as a viewer, and we may want to add someone else as well. So when I come over into the Mark environment, I can say select a project, and I'll see that I have Cindy's demo workspace. Let me close this. And I can see the demo project. And then I could view any of the notebooks that might be in that project. And I see that there's one called a test notebook. So we're going to start a notebook server, and that will take a little bit of time because it's actually starting up the interpreter in the background. And meanwhile, we're going to go to the same view. And we're going to look at this notebook on the side of Cindy. So we can open that here as well. Now, what's nice about the notebook environment is having shared these is I can not only view these across both users, but I can also have changes made to these as well. And if I execute that, you notice that those results show up immediately in the environment where it's shared. Now, recall that we created Mark as a viewer of Cindy's workspace, and so therefore, we don't have the ability to execute these. There is no button here to actually execute the notebook, unlike in Cindy's where there is. He can only view those. That gives you a feel of the interactive nature, the collaboration between users. You can have multiple users as well. It doesn't just have to be two. It could be as large as your team requires. Okay, so a little bit more on the workspace permissions. This is the way by which users collaborate and grant access to others. There are three levels: the manager, developer, and viewer. And we saw the developer and viewer for that. Be aware that if you select the manager and developer, it does allow users to drop tables, create tables, and run any scripts that are in that workspace and account. And we already talked about how re-adding a user will overwrite the previous settings. So we have the ability to manage this. And specifically, as a summary of what each user is able to do, what permission level, we have the manager, developer, and viewer. Projects, developers, and viewers can only view the content. Managers can actually create, update, and delete. Workspace is view only across. They can't delete that or manipulate it. Notebooks, there's a little bit more flexibility for managers. The developer can only delete notebooks that that developer actually created in that workspace. And then scheduling of jobs, the manager can do that. The developer can view and run existing jobs for shared notebooks, and the viewer can view jobs and run jobs of shared notebooks only. notebook basics just to get us into that. We can create a notebook, and we do that on the Notebooks page by clicking Create. You have to be in a Workspace project that you can actually write to be able to do that. And so we're going to go into the Data Scientist account and create a notebook in the DevTest Workspace and Customer Segmentation projects. And so this will be visible to the other users in that space. So here we're back at Mark. We're just going to go to our notebooks. Here we're going to log out and log in as Anne. And we're in the customer segmentation project. So in this case, I can go to Notebooks in Anne's account and say, well, let's create a new notebook here. I give it a name, so we'll call this Anne's New Test Notebook. And we can say whatever comments we'd like there, and the connection is by default the global connection that's available to us. And so once we're in this notebook, we can add whatever we'd like. Now for Markdown, we use %MD, and in this case, we might say this is our title, as we had before with that. And if I run this, I see that I get the result. Now, let's change projects in Mark's account because he wants to get it into the customer segmentation as well. And look, we have Anne's New Test Notebook. And just as before, we will see the contents of that. But notice here that Mark can actually collaborate because he's has the manager role or the owner role of this DevTest workspace. So in this case, if I have a subtitle going in, that will also show up in Anne's view as well. So this is another example of the collaboration that's there. Now you can import notebooks. Now you might say, well, if everything is stored in the in this environment, in the notebooks environment, where do I get such a notebook? Well, you can use perhaps external Zeppelin interfaces that you might have created some notebooks, and you want to use some of that code again in this environment. And so that might be one, or you're in the OML Notebooks environment itself, and you want to export one of your notebooks either as a personal copy, a personal backup, or something you want to share with somebody externally. But then once you have that, you import that into, again, a workspace project that you can write to. So let's do that again for Anne, since we're in her account, and we're going to import a clustering notebook into the DevTest workspace and customer segmentation project. We'll also talk about interpreter bindings just briefly, but we have more to say about that a little bit later. So back here, we want to import a notebook. So we're going to go back to our Notebooks tab. We're going to click Import. And we have the clustering notebook that we wish to add. Now, since I've run this before, we had a previous clustering one, but notice that we get a new number appended to it just so it keeps it as unique. And if we were to click into this notebook, it will spawn the notebook server for that, and then we'll be able to see what the contents of that notebook are. Okay, so this is essentially one of the notebooks that we have as a template, which we'll say more about later also. So there's nothing specific about this particular notebook other than we're using it to illustrate this notion of importing. Now, when we talk about importing a notebook, one of the things that we can do is to look at the interpreter bindings. And the interpreter bindings are telling us how we're going to connect and what level of service we want to get out of the PDB that we are connected to. So I'm not going to say more about that now. We'll come back to that. But basically, know that these are something that you need to look at when you import a notebook. Saving a ScratchPad as a notebook. So what's the ScratchPad? Well, the ScratchPad is really just a glorified notebook, nothing more. So you can click on that and it will take you to a paragraph that already has %SQL if you connect to the SQL query ScratchPad, or a %script if you are connecting to the SQL script ScratchPad. And so what we'll do is we'll go into the TimDBA account, and we'll look at the ScratchPad that's there, and we'll just do a quick query to see what are all the tables that are available to us there. And then users can rename ScratchPad itself, and that will actually cause it to get stored in your notebook listing. So we'll head back to that. All right, so we're going to log out here. I'm going to sign into Tim. All right. Now notice down here we have the run SQL statement and run SQL script. And so these are effectively the ScratchPad. So if I go in here and I click this, what will come up is a new ScratchPad. Notice there's no %SQL here. The reason is because %SQL is the default, and I could type it if I wanted to be explicit, but it's not necessary. And then I could say select star from user tables, or all tables, depending on what I want to do. And so I'm running that, and this comes back with the result for all of the tables and that are available. He has no tables. I think that's why we go with all. And here we see a number of ones that are owned by sys, by the sh schema, and we see all the different tables that are available in the PDB. All right, so we have that. Now, if we just get out of this and we go back to notebooks, we have the SQL query ScratchPad, and this is the one that we were just in. So if I go back into this notebook, you'll see that it should be the same all tables that we just created, and the results are there. Now I can change the name of this. Give it the date, just so that's clear what's going on, and now this is going to be renamed. That's how I rename a notebook in general, and in particular for the ScratchPad, I'll come back here and I'll see that I have this notebook. Now, if I create a new ScratchPad, I will get a new clean entry. So let's just go home and click a new SQL statement there. And we have a new ScratchPad to work with. So that's dealing with ScratchPads. Versioning a notebook. Now, versions are important because you want to make sure that you don't lose previous work, and you would like a convenient way in which to create new versions and revert versions. So in the Mark Project Lead account, we're going to select a notebook and then click version. That will allow us to manipulate any existing versions as well as to create new ones. From there, we're going to create a new version of this, and then we'll show some of the functionality associated there. All right, so we'll go into, well, we're in the Mark account over here, so I'm going to go home. We're going to click on Notebooks here, and I've got clustering 1. So we added this. Well, this is something that Anne created, but I might want to manipulate that. So I'm going to select this and say version. And this brings me into the version page. From there, I can click Add a Version, and I might give it a comment as Stable Clustering Version 1.0. So we save that, and we see that we have the version at this point. Now, I can do a few things from this. Obviously, I can delete the version, I can revert the version, or I can create a new notebook from this version. So if I have multiple versions of this, I might want to create a new notebook from one of the previous versions or revert to that. So let's explore how that actually works. So we're going to sign out here. We're going to go back to Anne, and we'll go into the notebooks that she has available, and she can see clustering 1. So we're going to open clustering 1. And then I'm going to go back to my notebooks here, and I'm in clustering one, so I want to make some changes to this one. Now we versioned it, so we could get back to it if we make some other changes. So both of us are going to be working on the same notebook itself, and I'm going to add a paragraph here just to note that we're going to have some changes to this. Okay, so we will edit this with %markdown and say, yeah. So whatever my changes are, and we see that Anne is viewing those as well. So I come back because I didn't really want to make those changes. And so let's go back to our notebooks here. And if I select clustering 1 and go into versions, let's go back to that previous one. So I'm going to click this and I say revert version, and it's going to give me an error. It's going to say you can't do that, and you can't do that because somebody else has it open. So we're going to ask our team members to close that, and they do that simply by going back to notebooks. And now if I go into version again for clustering 1, I can say revert version. Notebook is restored. So if I head back to my notebooks and view this, and over here view the same thing, we'll see that we have the original version of the notebook restored. Without the modifications that you saw previously. Okay? And this is just taking a little bit of time to get the image back up because it has to reload that. Okay, so let's head back and saying save a notebook as a template. So, templates are a way that allow us to publish notebooks essentially as read-only reports, if you will, or a snapshot of a notebook. And so we'll look at the OML template UI that is going to allow us to share our work with others in that way. And it allows users also to create notebooks from templates. So we'll be in the Anne Data Scientist project on the notebooks page, and we're going to select a notebook and click Save as Template. From that, we'll get the Save as Template dialog. And we can specify the name, some comments, tags, and we can then say, do we want to save it to personal or shared? And I'll say a little bit about that once we get there. Okay, so we're in Anne's account, and we go back to notebooks. And perhaps we have, clustering 1, and we want to save that as a template. So we'll click Save as Template here. And I want to call this my shared clustering 1 notebook. And I could say this is a stable version for reuse. And I can also give it some tags. Now there's some predefined tags that I have here. So perhaps if this is clustering, I might want to go down and grab the clustering one. But I could just add something else as well and just say machine learning. And I'll get that. Now you have two choices as to saving it as a personal template or as a shared. Now if it's personal, it's something that only you can see. So even though your workspace is shared, only you will be able to see these compared to other users that might be using the same workspace. If you indicate shared though, that means that anyone else can see those. So before we do that, I'm going to make this shared. And we're going to go over here to shared templates and notice what we have for our shared templates. So we're going to share this one here and has that, and then we're going to reload this, and what we should see is that we now have my shared clustering 1 that we just created. And so that's the one that Anne had just done. And so now I can go in and load that notebook, but one of the things that you'll notice is that I don't have the ability to execute that. Notice there's no triangle that allows me to to run any part of this notebook. And that's by design. What we want is to go back to our templates, and I then select the square of that template and say create notebook. From there, I can create a new notebook based on that. From template, I can indicate what project I would like this to be added to. So I'll just put it in my project, Mark's project. Okay, and then we click OK. And that puts us here. So if I now go into my notebooks for that workspace, I've got a whole bunch of these, but I should have my new notebook from that available. New clustering one from template, and that's the one I just created today. Okay. So collaboration, let's just briefly summarize what we were saying with collaborating with other users. So you share your work, you publish your work as reports or create notebooks from templates. The unit of sharing is the workspace, so you want to be able to grant workspace access with that, so when those users log in, they can see any of the projects or notebooks that are in that workspace. And what they can do in that is relative to the permissions that they've been granted. They can open the same notebook across many different users, so they can interactively, dynamically see one another's changes and work on things in real time. Lastly, the templates is the other area for collaboration, where you have the three types: the personal, shared, and examples. Now, we showed the shared explicitly. Personal is really the same thing, except that nobody else can see them. In the case of examples, those are ones that we provide, Oracle provides, as part of the system to illustrate how to use various features of OML4SQL in this case. So we have a number of notebooks that talk about anomaly detection, regression, classification, and if we go back to AND interface, let me just show this here. We go into examples, and you see the set of example notebooks that we have there. And these have been recently updated to have an even more concise way of specifying machine learning functionality. Connection groups and interpreter bindings. So we're going to move on to another important topic, because as I mentioned at the outset, this tells us how we can interact with the PDB, the pluggable database that is supporting our autonomous database. So with connection groups, these are also known as Zeppelin interpreter sets. So if you're familiar with Zeppelin, that might be a more familiar term for you. But it's basically a collection of database connections. So we have a global connection group, and this is created automatically when a new autonomous database is provisioned. And this is something that users don't have control over, even the administrator, to extend. The developer role can view the database connections. The administrator can view and edit certain aspects of database connections. They can change a name so that it should be used differently for their set of users. There's a thing called a row render limit, which indicates how many rows of data you want to come back and be displayed in the table or the result for your paragraph execution, and of course a comment. You can also, the administrator can also reset and stop database connections. And this might be useful if you wish to stop a long-running job or some other reason to interrupt that. And then in the database section, you also have the ability to turn off the DBMS output content. So there are two settings, enabled and disabled. And DBMS output is writing results to the screen as part of your PL SQL content. So you can turn that on or off if you want a non-verbose output. Okay, but the users have to log back in for that to take effect. I mean, basically you have to restart the Zeppelin engine to have that. So let's take a look at these in a little bit more detail. So the connection group, I'm going to go back to our accounts here. And we're in Mark, so we're going to start with what does the user see, and then I also want to log in as the administrator because those are two different views. And you can compare with what each of those is able to do. So connection groups side by side. We have on the left the developer role, and we see that within a connection group we have three listings, high, medium, and low. Now the designation of these is that low is intended to consume minimal resources. Generally, jobs are executed serially, no parallelism. Medium can have some degree of parallelism, but it's gives you more, a little less concurrency in terms of number of concurrent users over low. And then high is the one where you're giving access to the largest number of resources for parallel computation, and that restricts the number of users to a certain maximum, and others will be queued up if there are too many of those. So we see so far the admin and the developer looks pretty much the same, except over here in the admin we can reset one of these interpreter bindings. And so let's go even further with that. If we go into one of these, we're looking at high. Can't change anything, but you can see that high corresponds to a row render limit of 1,000 rows, whatever the comment was before, and the DBMS output is enabled. The administrator, on the other hand, as we discussed a moment ago, can change the name of that, can increase or decrease the row render limit, the comment, and also say whether or not the DBMS output should be enabled or disabled. Okay. So the interpreters themselves are, it's essentially a plugin for using a specific data processing language at the back end. We have SQL today. There are some Python and R interpreters as well, and we're going to be expanding this with Python and then R later in the year. The current supported interpreters we have are the SQL and the script. So SQL is just for regular SQL queries. The script will run PL SQL. And MD is for a markdown, as you've seen that we have the ability to have some text formatting capabilities with that. And as I mentioned before, we also have the interpreter bindings saying how both the notebook by default will map to these connections, but also individual paragraphs. And we'll look at how we can manipulate that. So the notebooks will contain an internal ordering of these. The default order is usually low, medium, and high, so that we'll choose the low execution for the maximum concurrent users, but perhaps just serial processing, and then followed by medium and high. And you can enable or disable those by clicking on them, and we'll see how that works out. So yeah, let me go to that now and just look at the interpreter bindings a little bit more specifically. So if we're in Mark's account and we have the notebooks, let's go back to our project here. DevTest, customer segmentation, and we're going to open up N's new test notebook. This is going to load the notebook. We're going to click on the interpreter binding here, and notice that we have low, medium, and high, and markdown. And all of these are selected. Now, typically with the Always Free account, that's what I'm using here, by the way. This is something that you can recreate with an Always Free account as well. But you can turn these off. You can drag them. So suppose if you wanted to have high be the default that gets used, you could list that first. But we're going to keep it as such, and mark down, so you can do that. This little restart symbol on the left allows you to restart that interpreter. And so if you find that something seems to have gotten stuck, or you want to terminate something, you may want to restart that interpreter and go from there. Okay. Now, you can actually override interpreter bindings within a paragraph. So you might say that, well, overall, I want everything to run in low, but I might have one paragraph where I want to have parallelism because I know that it will benefit from it. I have access to parallelism, so why not do that? So I'm going to show you how that works. We're going to go into Tim's account. And what that is, we'll click the paragraph where we want to change the interpreter. We'll invoke that interpreter with the specific binding and run the paragraph. And the main thing is just to highlight that here's the way you approach that. You can specify the name of that particular interpreter, and then you can check to see what that interpreter binding is by invoking this SQL statement for returning the service name that's being used. All right, so here we're going to log out of our admin account. We'll log into Tim. And we're going to go into a ScratchPad. Okay. Now, if we type select context user env service name, now if I type that correctly, what we should see is that we're using low in this case. So this is DB low, and this is the service name that's associated with that. But if I want to override that, all I have to do is enter DB1 underscore medium, okay? And then if I take that same query and execute it within this paragraph, you'll see that it comes back with a medium specification. Indeed, okay? And so this is what allows you within a particular paragraph to change the resources allocated for that particular execution. Now, if you don't specify, if you don't have any specific interpreter that's set up for your binding, you'll get most likely the database name, service name not found. And that's something that you'll then, it should be a clue that you should go in and set your bindings on the various paragraphs. Now, when you create a new notebook, you'll want to check to see what those bindings are. Normally, it will inherit the initial interpreter binding order, low, medium, and high. When you import a notebook, it's important to also check that because it will inherit the defined interpreter bindings that are in that environment. And you want to make sure that, first of all, things are set so that you don't get the error noted above, but also they're in the correct order, and those that can or should be enabled are. When you export a notebook, it will inherit those defined interpreter bindings for that notebook. And those should be noted that they're not portable cross-pluggable databases. So if you load those into a different pluggable database, that those bindings will not be used, and you'll again get the default ones. So you shouldn't rely on those being set correctly. And finally, when you have notebook creation from templates, the notebook will inherit the default order of the interpreter bindings as well. And so again, if you try to run a notebook created from a template and it's giving you the error up above, it simply means go in and set the interpreter bindings accordingly. All right. I see that we're at 1:50. Do we want to take any questions at this point, or we could either continue with this section or take a few questions before we end at 1 o'clock? How are we doing on the question front, Marcos?
We're good. We have one question right now. I've answered several already. So I think it might be a good time for us to do a pause if you want and open up for more questions.
Yeah, why don't we do that then? Sounds good.
Yeah, there's a lot of material. So the last question that came in is, when working on a shared notebook, whether we are able to know who has collaborated for which paragraph. So I don't
that
think we
level
have
of
that.
detail is not maintained, no. It's basically they are there and people are working together on such notebooks, but we don't track who is actually making what changes when, short of if you've created a template of that or created a version.
Right. Yeah, and the next question, whether we can use any other programming language in the notebook.
So today, the language that's supported is SQL and PL SQL. We are going to be enabling Python. That's part of the OML for Pi project, and that is coming out soon. I can't give a specific date, but we've been planning that now for some time, and we expect it to be released in the coming months. So that will give users access to Python. And also on the roadmap is following that with R. So you know that we have OML for R, or what used to be referred to as Oracle R Enterprise. And so that functionality will also be coming online later in this year.
Then the next question is, what are the, not sure. Oh, there are C#, OML, IDM, OML user, and OML $proxy user for an automated database. I guess maybe those are the users that are being created automatically by OML.
Well, so when you create a new database, right? If you go into the Always Free account, like I did for this one, the person who creates it, right, is going to have the administrator role, and then they can create additional users. From there, you're free to create whatever named users you'd like, and you just provide an email address that validates that user. But even for the accounts that I created here for the multiple users, I'll share the same email address, my own personal one, and that worked out just fine. So I'm not sure I understand the C# connection, but you can name them whatever you would like.
Oh, no, I believe that's I imagine it's probably users that are automatically created by the OML on top of Autonomous. So maybe there are files, or just like the DM $, right, that shows up in an environment. Maybe these are the, there's an OML $proxy user.
Sure. Yeah, there's administrative information, no doubt, that's behind the scenes, but for those details, I think that's sort of another level of presentation, if you will, how to get to that or how to interpret those.
Right, and then yeah, the other question was whether in the script paragraph we supported also Python and R. And I think the answer was already given, right? That we are going to support, right, Python and R coming up.
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea is right now we have two separate ScratchPads, and really, as I said, they are just glorified notebooks because you can create new paragraphs, you can change what the interpreter binding is for those, so you could have SQL and script today, even in the same ScratchPad. So what we're thinking about is saying that it will just be a common ScratchPad that you can have whatever paragraph you would like from that, and they could all be in the same initial notebook. So yes, the ScratchPad concept will continue, and it will allow you to have whichever language or languages we're supporting at that time.
Okay, and the other people asking how they get access to play with OML for Python.
Well, OML for Python is in limited beta. We have a select number of customers who've been nominated to participate in that program. So it's been limited to that. It's not limited or general availability to the public at this point. And so as soon as it's available through Autonomous Database, that is most likely when participants will be able to access that.
And someone else asking about Python with the database engine. Not sure. So I'm not sure if that's the same concept. So Frank,
are they distinguishing between on-premise or autonomous?
Yeah, you can probably unmute yourself, Frank, if you want that. Clarify that a little better. So you could, even in the % script right now in OML Notebooks, you are not going to be able to use Python. That % script interpreter, it's only right now using SQL and PL SQL. The autonomous database does not allow you to run Python interfaces there, right? It's not allowing anyone to run any XProc engine, so you would not find Python installed alongside the autonomous database, by itself. So hopefully that answers the question.
Mm-hmm.
Another question: will the Zeppelin notebook infrastructure, along with OML4Py, ever be available to Exadata clouded customers?
Yeah, the request for having this autonomous functionality and OML notebooks on premise, for example, or in other cloud environments, has been discussed, and it's under review. That's really all we can say at this point. But certainly there is interest in making it available beyond just what we support today with Autonomous Database.
Okay, last question, so it's not available for on-premise. I'm replying to that. Is it possible to connect to Autonomous from Python? So I believe that, yes, right, that you can use CX Oracle and from an on-premise Python, right, or any Python, you could probably connect to the Oracle database and pull data from that database, right? I'm not sure you can today submit transparently, right, all the capabilities that we're going to have with OML machine learning for Python, right? So if
correct. So basically, as you mentioned, the CX Oracle, which is the Python interface to Oracle database, that will allow you to connect to any Oracle database as such. OML for Pi, however, has its own client library. And at least in release 1, the target is to have that available with Autonomous Database and Oracle Machine Learning Notebooks only. Later, we'll be looking at having that exposed perhaps to other clients. But at least for release 1, users should only expect OML for Pi to be available through that interface. Okay. Well, it seems like we're at the top of the hour. Thank you all for your attention in this, and yes. Great questions.
Excellent. Yes, so thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much for all this session, and it seems that it's very interesting, and we do have I think enough material for the next session for sure, and all the questions.
Oh yeah.
So thank you very much again, Mark. Thank you everyone for joining. I will stop the recording, but I'll keep answering the questions on the Q&A so that we get those answers as well available to you guys later.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Marcus, as well. Take care, everyone, and bye.
Thank you.